Now, as I'm sure you've heard in the news or read in the papers, the results of the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review has been published this morning and has revealed that tens of thousands of women and children were catastrophically harmed by 3 avoidable health scandals, and women were ignored. The review investigated vaginal mesh used as a treatment for incontinence, Primodos, a hormone pregnancy test which became associated with damage to infants born to mothers who took it, and sodium valproate, a treatment for epilepsy known to harm the fetus if taken when pregnant. It was Baroness Cumberlege who led the review. Jane spoke to her yesterday about how it was carried out, her insistence that those affected should get an apology, and the recommendations she has made.
Well, one of our major recommendations is that we should have a patient safety commissioner. This is somebody who will really listen to patients, hear what they say, and monitor what is going on. They will also call the healthcare system to account, and that is important because people have been going on and on and on, promising things, and nothing has happened. So we want action as soon as possible.
I think a lot of people, a lot of our older listeners will obviously think back to thalidomide, and they will simply not be able to believe that these 3 separate scandals were allowed to happen. Can you understand that?
I am deeply shocked. I think this whole thing has been a mega disaster. And it's not just about looking at one rogue surgeon or a hospital that's fallen apart or whatever. This is about thousands of women in 3 different areas who have been ignored. And indeed in one, sodium valproate, which is taken by women who are epileptic and it controls that, it is still happening today. And those women, if they are not told, if they are not aware that this drug will cause them damage, then they have a chance of 1 in 2 babies being seriously harmed.
Well, let's start then with that anti-epilepsy medication, as you say, still being prescribed. Should it be banned?
We can't just ban things because for some women it is the only medication that really controls their epilepsy. But what it does need to do is to ensure when they are pregnant or thinking of getting pregnant, then they should stop or at least consider, talk to their clinicians and possibly not continue with that particular drug, but see if there are better alternatives.
And Primodos, that now isn't in use, but the impact of that was absolutely colossal.
It was. And again, the really shattering thing about that particular event is that it could have been stopped. People knew it was harming. The concerns were rising, and yet nobody said, we've got to take this off the market now. And these poor parents with their siblings who now are in their 50s, 60s, whatever, who is going to look after them in the future? That is a real worry for them.
When Primodos was being prescribed, the impact was felt, if not acknowledged, and yet again, people suffering were ignored. Did this happen at every level of the NHS, or were some people more inclined to intervene and acknowledge the mistakes that were being made?
Well, what we are saying very strongly is that the healthcare system really has failed. It's failed these women. And we need an apology from the Secretary of State to say that they have erred, that these things should not have happened, and he should apologize to the nation for the harm that has been done.
What about the people you spoke to? Because this has been a work that has, an effort that has taken a huge amount of your time. I think you and your fellow members of the review have travelled the length and breadth of the land talking to people. What have you heard and what have you seen?
Huge suffering, terrible, terrible things happening to families. We've seen women who've had mesh inserted, that they have been active previously, they are now reduced to a wheelchair. And this is because of the enormous harm that has been done to them. And we have heard the suffering in all three areas. And this should not happen. It was avoidable. And that is the thing we want to really put right for the future. And some of our recommendations are about the future, because the nation should not go through something like this again.
But what is terrifying is that there appears to be a culture of denial here at work, going back many, many decades. How do we change that?
Well, you are so right. That denial is absolutely unacceptable. And we have heard, even now, that that is happening in some quarters. And women are being told, all right, well, you think you're suffering, but actually it's all in your head. You're just thinking about it. It's not true. It is true. We have heard so many stories of real tragedies, of lives turned upside down, relationships broken. In the past, they've had careers, they've had jobs, and no longer, because they are far too disabilitated. And so we're saying that simply must not happen. So we have got recommendations that we think will address these issues for the future and ensure that in the future these sort of things will not happen, especially to the extent that it has in what we have been studying.
Vaginal mesh, its use has been paused but not banned. What's the situation now?
Well, we were horrified by what we heard, and we said we must halt these operations. So in July 2018, we halted them, and they have not been reinstated. And we said, if you are going to reinstate them, you must have these safety measures. Those safety measures, 2 years on, have not been met. And we say, well, if in the end there is a woman with cancer and this is the only option that she has, we're saying these women should be told exactly what the risks are. Obviously what the benefits are, if there are benefits, but the risks, and they should be told the alternatives. And we are convinced that there are many women, if they really knew what these medications, what these devices have done to women, they would think very, very seriously of either taking the medication or agreeing to the device.
Of course, this isn't an easy time to criticise the NHS in any shape or form, but if you could point to some of the failings you've seen here, what would you say?
Well, I'd say it's not just the NHS, it's the whole healthcare system. We're talking much wider than that. We're talking about the regulators, the manufacturers, the policymakers, other people involved in healthcare. And it is to actually look at the whole picture that is really, really important.
But if a woman says that her medication or her treatment is causing her harm, and she believes it to be causing her harm, she must be taken seriously.
Of course, of course. And I think women now are of a different generation from mine, where we always believed what we was told was right, but today, no. You should investigate, you should look at Google and all other sources and to see really what the truth is, because you need to make these decisions. It's your body and it should be your decision.
And the ramifications for the people who've been involved for years, in some cases, in campaigning around these issues. What do you think they will be satisfied by in the future?
Well, we are saying it is essential that they get some recompense. And those issues have to be taken seriously. And we want 3 different schemes for the 3 different areas to give those women help that they need. And it's not just treatment, it's financial help and non-financial help. And for the future, we want a redress agency. And that agency will not be adversarial. It will not study blame. It will ensure that there is proper learning within the system of the mistakes that are being made.
But as you acknowledge in the report, some people have not had their concerns addressed. There are other treatments and other drugs that were in the mix here, but you simply didn't have time to deal with them. So there are ongoing concerns, aren't there?
Well, there are. And we were given 3 different areas. And I have to say, that was very challenging. Usually when you do a review, or it's about one road consultant, it's about one hospital that has gone to pieces and isn't working correctly. We were given 3 different areas. And so it is a very complex report from that point of view. But what we did find, which was interesting, was that some of the issues read across to all 3 areas. And Jane, you're right, it is about women's consent. They need to be now told in real detail what the risks are, what the opportunities are, what are the alternatives are. And also it may be something about, well, I'm afraid we'll have to reconsider this later.
In brief, are women still getting a shabbier range of treatments than men, and are they more likely to be disbelieved than men?
I think to some extent that is true. And therefore women do need often a companion, somebody else who's going to be with them, who will also listen to what's being said at a consultation or whatever. And also it's an opportunity today to record it. So you can take it away on your iPhone. You can share it with your family and your friends. And they may say, but he didn't tell you this, did he? He didn't answer that question, did he or she, whoever is treating them. So I think the new technology, we have to work differently, and we can actually make things safer.
And it's very likely, of course, that Matt Hancock, who's the Secretary of State for Health, will indeed make the apology. Well, he will make the apology, but will your recommendations be implemented?
We will fight tooth and nail to make sure they are. We cannot have these sort of situations continuing.
Baroness Cumberlege, who chaired the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review. Now, obviously, the issues covered in the report span decades and different governments, but it is, of course, for this government to respond. And indeed, the Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, has this morning issued a full apology and said it's important to learn from the report. But what do the people at the heart of this review, the women affected, make of it all? Well, Mary McLaughlin is a campaigner for women injured by pelvic mesh in Ireland. Claire Pelham is Chief Executive of the Epilepsy Society. They both gave evidence to the review and they both had a chance to read the report. So, Claire, what's your reaction to the report from the perspective of those affected by sodium valproate?
Everyone at the Epilepsy Society and those who've been most affected, who've had the opportunity to look at the report's conclusions, warmly welcomes it. From our perspective, it's absolutely brilliant. Baroness Cumberlege has not only prescribed justice for the hundreds of thousands of women who've been harmed by valproate, Primodos and the mesh, but much more than that, as she said, she's had the opportunity to look at the underlying reasons why these disasters affecting hundreds of thousands of women have happened. And let's be clear, will continue to happen if nothing changes.
But Claire, it seems it's been known for ever such a long time that the sodium valproate had a high chance of causing harm in pregnant women. Why did nobody do anything about it?
It's absolutely been known for decades, and it's still going on. Hundreds of babies will be born this year to women taking valproate who are not aware of the risk. And there's just been a complete failure of leadership in the healthcare system. The review says, and this is staggering thing for a review this kind to conclude, that the healthcare system does not recognise patients as its raison d'etre. So, I mean, that's just staggering. What is the point of our healthcare system if it's not to support patients? And that's a really damning finding. And I hope that the Cumberlege review will be as influential as Macpherson. Just as Macpherson said the police were institutionally racist and that was the trigger for change, Cumberlege says the healthcare system is institutionally elitist and it must change.
Now, Mary, I know you have been affected by Pelvic Mesh and have long been a campaigner on behalf of other women. What do you make of the report's findings?
Well, as a mesh-injured woman, I've had my implant implanted in 2008 and had it taken out in 2019 in America. Of course, all the campaigners welcome the system-type responses, the putting in place a commissioner, putting in place a task force, putting in place lots of institutions to ensure that the women don't fall through the net or other patients don't fall through the net. But in the terms of the day-to-day for mesh-injured women and for the women on my group, and they're from the north of Ireland and from the south of Ireland, I fear that we have a real problem with these specialist mesh centres and that they are being promoted as something that they will not deliver on.
Why are they going to be a problem, would you say?
Because from my perspective, they are old wine in new bottles. The mesh centres, I'd like to explain to the public, they're not actual buildings or centres. They're hours of clinic time within existing hospitals. And our problem is that the women are being sent back to the same pool of surgeons who put their mesh in, who denied they were mesh injured, and who up until very recently were not even interested in trying to remove the implants fully and safely for the women. So I think for anybody who is traumatized, they will understand that the victims of these surgeries and these devices are being asked to go back to the same physicians who have ignored and denied them. And all these physicians belong to clinical bodies like BAUS or BSUG and the GMC. All their members are doctors too. So we feel that these institutions in our system are just recycling doctors they already had.
Why did you have yours, Mary, why did you have yours removed in the States?
Because that is the only surgeon that the international mesh community are very confident of. Dr. Dionysius Veronicus in St. Louis, Missouri. I've tried in all the devolved governments and in England, and I worked with the Cumberlege Review as well to bring Dr. Veronicus here. I had asked the doctor if he would do an offer to the women in that he'd be brought in the public health system, and that he worked through a backlog of patients. He was prepared to come for 4 to 6 weeks, and he works 6 days a week anyway. He has explanted thousands of meshes. I was lucky. I escaped the knife in London and got to America. My mesh was intact, so it hadn't been previously cut or trimmed, as the surgeons say. Once they do that, the ends of the meshes grow new scar tissue from that operation. And if women have a few trimmings, which can be done very quickly, that scar tissue can prevent even a world expert from accessing the remainder mesh in their body. So I saw this guy on Twitter, and he had put up pictures of the mesh that I have in me, of him removing the mesh out of the groin sections, and it was my jaw just dropped, because the surgeons in London hadn't told me. They hadn't been clear how much of my mesh was in my groin. So the mesh that was taken out was 28 centimetres long. And for the transobturator mesh, the one that the Baroness has more or less put in the same category as the prolapse meshes, that they're more dangerous and should only be used under high vigilance regimes. That's the one that the doctors in the UK, and not just in the UK, around the world, don't know how to take it out.
Claire, obviously a huge amount of trust has been broken across the years in all of these things. How easy is it going to be to rebuild trust which has been so damaged?
I think the healthcare system must use this as a trigger for change. What's really needed is cultural change, and I'd like to make it clear that none of us at the Epilepsy Society are critical of frontline NHS staff who've done and do the most amazing work. This is a failure of leadership. And I just like to pick out the recommendation for a patient safety commissioner, because I think this is absolutely critical to getting the culture right for this century. What we need is a Florence Nightingale of the 21st century, a really ballsy woman able to take on the medical establishment on behalf of patients. That's why the healthcare system is there for patients, and it's about time their voice and their experience was regarded as valid.
And Mary, how confident are you that this will lead to change and won't just be another review that gets shelved?
I'm not confident. I teach law, I teach legal systems. I know that government uses reviews and reports, and the government can pick and choose then which recommendations it would put in place. I am not confident that if we go to the bottom end of all those processes, that a woman going to a specialist mesh centre will be able to assert her right to have her medical device removed. I'm not confident about that, because the specialist mesh centres that have been commissioned now in the UK, they have a new complex surgery removal specialist centres. So among that pool of surgeons who couldn't help us and were very covert about our injuries, they have now put themselves forward as mesh removal specialists, and now the women have an extra layer. They have to go through going to an MDT at their local clinic, and then only when that MDT says that they can have their mesh fully removed can they be put to another layer, which is an MDT of this specialist complex mesh removal. Now, to put it bluntly, if I walked into a hospital today, to a mesh clinic, they would refuse to allow me to have my mesh removed, because I did not have the mesh erosion, which is a visible and palpable mesh coming through your innards and cutting you. I never had that. Mary, but I was bedbound for 3 years.
Mary, we must stop. Mary McLaughlin, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and Claire Pelham. We would like to hear from you. If you have had the kind of experiences we've heard about, you can email us or you can send us a tweet. And Mary and Claire, we will stay on this story and see what happens. Thank you both very much. Now, still to come in today's programme, the experience of the daughter whose mother died when she was young. How does she navigate the milestones in her life? Graduation, first job, engagement without maternal support. And the serial, of course, the 8th episode of 6 Suspects. Now, earlier in the week, you may have missed the young artist Abigail Magurle, who won an award for a picture of herself in the bath, or Ivana Bartoletti, who talked about artificial intelligence. If you missed the live programme, you can always catch up. All you have to do is go to BBC Sounds and search for Woman's Hour, and there we will be. Now, children in Scotland have all